Good evening, everybody. It's lovely to see you. Welcome again to the British Academy, and welcome to this event, How Languages Make Us, Explorations Through Performance. We've got a fascinating programme for you tonight. This event is going to explore the links between language, identity and society through an evening that juxtaposes multilingual performances with short talks by leading researchers in languages and linguistics. We're going to offer you a journey through some of the many languages of the UK. At the British Academy, we believe that languages are strategically vital for the future of the UK, for our economy, trade, diplomacy, soft power, social cohesion, knowledge and the research base, and health and well-being. Multilingualism is beneficial on the societal and on the individual level. It offers deeper cultural knowledge and understanding and broadens mindsets and horizons. However, as many of you will know, the supply of language skills in the UK has in recent years been worsening. We've seen a decline in uptake and provision of languages in schools, and at the level of higher education, language departments have, unfortunately, been suffering increasing cuts, contractions and departmental closures, with large regional cold spots in provision appearing. In that context, the Academy's language programme aims to monitor trends in language education and mobilise expertise to inform debate and policy about languages in education and society. Tonight, we hope on a more celebratory note and joining up language learning with the multilingual repertoires of the United Kingdom, we're going to be celebrating this country's rich linguistic cultures and communities, exploring how languages shape our identities and discovering why learning languages matters for a more inclusive world. You'll have seen from the programme that we're going to pair short talks with short performances, and I'll introduce our first two speakers now. There are full details on the website if you'd like more information, but our first speaker is Robert Dunbar. Rob is Chair of Celtic Languages, Literature, History and Antiquities at the University of Edinburgh. He's also a member of the Committee of Experts of the European Charter for Regional or Minority Languages and of Bòrd na Gàidhlig. Mairead Williams is a singer-songwriter from Llanelli in North Wales. She writes in Welsh and in English. Her bilingual debut album, I Drefn, was awarded Welsh Language Album of the Year in 2021, and her new EP, Everything I Left Behind, is now out. Rob's talk is going to explore broadcasting as a policy mechanism that allows minoritized languages in the UK to thrive, focusing specifically on his research on Gaelic broadcasting, and then Mairead will perform a short set of her own songs in Welsh. Over to you.
Tapalet, Charles. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be speaking on that topic, but something similar. So thank you very much. Tapaliv in Gaelic, Diolch in Welsh. Scottish Gaelic is filled with references to the ethnonym Gael, a Gael, or in its plural form, na Gael, the Gaels. In the past, ethnic identity corresponded to an ability to speak the Gaelic language. If you were a Gael, Gaelic was your first language. If you couldn't speak the language, you were likely not a Gael. Things are not so easy any longer. I have a rather unusual background. I'm a fluent Gaelic speaker who is from Canada originally, and I learned the language as an adult. Some of my ancestors were Gaelic speakers, Gaels, and some were not. A student once asked me whether I considered myself a Gael. Now, that's an interesting question, but I'll put it to one side for a moment. In addition to having done a PhD in Celtic studies, I'm also a lawyer by training. I told you that I have an unusual background. From my legal training, as well as from social sciences, I understand that ethnic identity doesn't necessarily correspond to language. In the UK, the question of what constitutes an ethnic group comes up from time to time, particularly in relation to equality law, where discrimination based on a number of grounds, including membership in an ethnic group, is prohibited. In the leading case of Mandla and Dowell Lee, the House of Lords had to consider the question of what constituted an ethnic group in the context of a case on discrimination. Lord Fraser of Tully Belton rejected a narrow biological or racial definition. He said that for a group to constitute an ethnic group, it must regard itself and be regarded by others as a distinct community by virtue of certain characteristics. He said that there were two essential characteristics. First, a long shared history of which the group is conscious as distinguishing it from other groups. And second, a cultural tradition of its own, including family and social customs and manners. He said that there were other characteristics which were relevant to the issue, but weren't essential, including a common geographical origin, a common literature, a common religion, and a common language. In other words, language is relevant, but it's not definitive. The court didn't have to consider the question of group membership. Who is a member of an ethnic group, who is not, and who gets to decide that question. And these are tricky questions. But remember, Lord Fraser of Tully Belton rejected a narrow biological or racial definition. Ethnicity is not primordial. It can change, and therefore it can be acquired and lost. So are Scottish Gaels an ethnic group? Gaelic is certainly a threatened minority language. But what about Gaels? How do they fit into this categorization? The courts have never had to consider this question. Based on the Mandla case, a good argument could be made that they are. They have a long shared history of which they are conscious and a cultural tradition of their own. But then there is the complex question of who is a member, who is part of the group, who is a Gael. This is where things get tricky. According to the most recent UK census in 2022, the number of people who can speak Gaelic is rising, almost 70,000, up from just under 58,000 in 2011. 2022 was important because this was the first time that we've seen a sharp increase in the number of speakers since really the language question on Gaelic came up in the census in the 19th century. Languages such as Gaelic is one of several indigenous minority languages in this category. They decline for many reasons, but one of the main factors is that many parents don't pass on the minority language to their children. Reasons for that are many and complex. Some would argue that those children are nonetheless Gaels, even though they don't have the language. And based on Lord Tully Belton's test, we might be right. What about non-speakers who are grandchildren or remoter descendants of Gaels? And what about those who do speak Gaelic, but whose parents or even grandparents don't speak it, and who may not have any family connection at all with the language and culture? Are they Gaels? Some research has been done on these questions amongst those who clearly would be Gaels, and even amongst those people, there is a range of views and little agreement. We don't know precisely who these 12,000 or so new speakers of Gaelic who appeared in the 2022 census are. Gaelic medium education, that is the teaching of the language, teaching through the medium of the language, began only in 1985, and increasing numbers of students are enrolled in it. In 2022-23, the last year for which we have statistics, there were over 5,500 pupils in Scottish primary and secondary schools learning through the medium of the language. Almost certainly, many of these new speakers in the 2022 census are people who have acquired the language in the school. Our son, now 18, is one of those 5,500 students in Gaelic medium education. My wife is a native speaker of Gaelic from the Isle of Lewis in the Outer Hebrides. I expect that most people would recognize that she is a Gael. That's certainly how she sees her own identity. There were about 40 children in our son's primary school year at Edinburgh's Gaelic primary school, Bunscoil Tuv na Parca. He was the only one who learned Gaelic in the household and who had a parent who was a Gael. The others came from diverse backgrounds. Some had a grandparent or other relatively near ancestor who was a Gael, or some other connection with the Gaelic Highlands and Islands of Scotland. Some had a parent or parents from Ireland who had learned at least some of our sister language, Irish, in school. Some had Scottish parents who themselves had no obvious connection to the language and culture, but were interested enough in it to enroll their children in the Gaelic school. But many of our son's classmates came from households in which one or both parents were immigrants. Most of those children are now fluent Gaelic speakers, and many, though not all, have developed a significant attachment to the language and culture. They are certainly part of our community of Gaelic speakers in Edinburgh. Ultimately, I don't think that what ethnic label we put on Gaelic speakers such as these is important. If the language is to survive, we need more of them, just as we need more people who clearly would be Gaels to pass on the language to their children. Without a doubt, more new speakers from different linguistic and cultural backgrounds will have an impact on the Gaelic culture and on the language itself. This is no bad thing. Young native speakers from the Outer Hebrides, the last strongly speaking Gaelic area in the world, participate in a culture that's much different from the culture that their grandparents did, and even their parents did. And their use of language has certainly changed. They're Gaelic speakers, but they live in the 21st century in a very diverse and changing world. Something is always lost and something is gained. Thanks to Gaelic being in the schools, they can read the language, something that many of their parents and grandparents could not do. Scottish Gaelic has a rich literary and cultural legacy. That's part of what led me to learn my ancestral language in the first language. But in my view, we needn't fear change. In any case, whether we like it or not, change always comes. We have an expression in Gaelic, Char Gaelic bristje na Gaelic sachistje. Broken Gaelic is better than dead Gaelic. Finally, am I a Gael? I don't know, and I don't really worry that much about it. I'm a highly fluent Gaelic speaker. I've raised my son in the language. I use it every day. I love the literature, the oral traditions, and the culture in all its diversity, and I teach it and try to pass on my enthusiasm for it to my own students and to pretty much everybody I meet. Gaels, including my wife and her family, have welcomed me. I try to do the same. So I say fáilte. Fáilte is the word in both Scottish Gaelic and Irish for welcome, or as my Welsh friends would say, croeso. Táfalh. Thank you very much.
Hello, noswaith dda, good evening. It's really lovely to be here in London as part of this event, especially being able to express my Welsh identity. I'm also really impressed with the turnout, considering there's tube strikes at the moment, so well done to everyone who made it. I'm going to start off with a song called Bòrd hir, which translates to a long morning. I used to live in London a couple of years ago, and this is a song that I wrote about being in a long-distance relationship in London and communicating with my partner who I speak Welsh with. And it just came out about a month ago. It's on my brand new EP. And yeah, this is Bòrd hir. Diolch, thank you. This next song is one I released in 2020. It's from my debut album, and it's a song about being hopeful and trusting yourself and holding on to that feeling, and it's called Dal ar y Teimlad. Diolch, thank you. I've got one song left for you. I also really want to thank Nikki. I've never ever, I've never performed one of my songs with someone interpreting it before, and it's really, it feels like a piece of theatre. It's really nice. And yeah, I'm really grateful for that. Diolch. This last song is called A Drefn, and it's a song I wrote about longing for members of my family that I never got to meet. And it's rooted in identity, and I guess it's a song I wrote as a way of making sense of that. And yeah, it's called A Drefn, and it translates to roughly to the way it is. Cymer drws a chymer glo I adael bwthyn bach y bro Nes I rioed gael cymryd cam I fewn Ond dyna ni fel y mae y drefn Cymerwr a graig ni o A hynny'n amser maith yn ôl Nes I rioed gael eu cwmni go iawn Ond hel meddyliau cynnes llawn Ond dyna ni fel y mae y drefn Mae'r rhai yn cwrdd yn cyrraedd sgwrs daw byth I ben Dyna ni fel y mae y drefn Yn byw a ffoi heb adael hoelen yn y pren Cymer wynebau cyfarwydd clyn Y cwpl sy'n awr di mynd yn hen Beth mor od ydi hiraeth am yr rhai Nath fy llwybr bywyd I byth gyfarfod Ond dyna ni fel y mae y drefn Mae'r rhai yn cwrdd yn cyrraedd sgwrs daw byth I ben Dyna ni fel y mae y drefn Ona ni hoelen arall yn y pren Diolch. Thank you. Diolch.
Many thanks to Rob and Barrett for that wonderfully complimentary set of reflections there culture, heritage, and identity. A remarkable underlining of the place of education and creativity in the recognition of multilingualism, but also in the revitalization of languages. Rob, I'll take away that phrase from Gaelic there, broken Gaelic is better than dead Gaelic. It's a real reminder, and it's something as a language educator I often say to my own students, that part of being human is finding ways to communicate. There's a spectrum of competences in language, and perfection is a myth, and everybody has a starting point. So thank you for that. I'm now going to introduce our next speaker, Devyani Sharma, and our next performer, Nomakwesi Becker. We're going to move from the indigenous minoritized languages of the UK to the many languages of the diaspora communities of London. London, a city of languages, home to over 300 tongues. Devyani is Professor of Language and Communication at the University of Oxford. She studies accents, dialects, migration, attitudes, and bilingualism. She's also a fellow of the British Academy. And her talk will be followed by Nomakwesi, who is a South African-German interdisciplinary artist who's performed in a range of places, including Goldsmiths, Westminster Abbey, South Bank Centre. Her multilingual work, as we're going to discover, explores memory, language, and belonging across diasporic lineages. Devyani, in her talk, is going to draw on research with the diaspora communities of Asian and African heritage in London to explore how belonging is retained and refashioned over generations through language, both through words and accents. And then Nomakwesi's performance of Plant Me will allow us to discover a work in English with German, Zulu, and Hausa. It moves between speech and song and touches on those themes of belonging, longing, and cultural family inheritance. Thank you very much to both of you.
Thank you so much, Charles. Our sense of self and of each other is rooted in language, whether spoken or signed. On the one hand, language is like clothing or like a hairstyle. We can choose our words, choose our sentences, our vocal style, our sounds, but only to a point. Language is also like breathing. We can't be fully conscious of it. It's not fully within our control. We grow into it in childhood and adolescence. So when we present ourselves to each other through language, it's a kind of struggle of self, trying to shape the way we want to be, while also simply being who we've been all our lives. We all detect these tiny cues from each other and use them to make social inferences about each other. In the work that I do as a sociolinguist, I record speakers at different ages, from different groups, bilinguals, people who've moved, people who haven't moved, and I look at how their accents and dialects change over time, what that tells us about the brain, but also about our social world. We ask questions like, how does this churn of agency and structure produce regular new dialects? When and why does a whole community develop a new way of speaking? How do these get perceived? And how does a sense of self emerge out of these forces that are much bigger than us? Preparing for today, I couldn't quite figure out how to share some of our larger findings, quantitative results, in such a short talk. But I found an answer when looking at Nomakwesi's work with her focus on storytelling. And I thought, why not let the people I've recorded speak for themselves? So I'll share a few extracts from over 200 oral histories interviews that I've collected over the years. And as time is limited, I'll focus on South Asian communities, their words and sounds. But in a current project, we're looking at the same questions across communities: white British speakers, Caribbean and African heritage communities of different generations, Eastern European Londoners, kids to adults. But for today, let's start our journey in India. How does language organize a person's social world? Here are some stretches of speech from a young man who works in a lighting shop in Delhi. I asked him what language he's most comfortable speaking. He said, my comfortable language is Hindi, English, Maithili, Bengali, Uriya. Telephonic language is Hindi, but if you're in-house, Maithili. English is a professional and paper language. Most in India, all paperwork are done in English. English ke saath advantage kya hai? The broader people knows it. People from South India, they don't know Hindi. People from West Bengal, they don't know Hindi. So obviously English is a broader language. I don't think it's a British culture. We're just using their language. He continues, when I was in call center, I was forced to do the American accent. But you know, if you're trying to switch on your accent, that's not so easy. We're quite comfortable with our English, you know. A young building contractor in Delhi, another person, says, I can't speak any language properly. Like English, Hindi, you know, Punjabi, my father and mother speak a lot of Multani. In school, I think so, Hindi, English, 50-50. With friends, Hindi. A lot of bad language, so it has to be Hindi. English is a status symbol. So already from these two young men, we get a flavor of the language affiliations, the personal attitudes, and also aptitudes that a person brings when they migrate. So what happens after migration? Let's turn to some British Asians. All the individuals I'll quote now were born and raised in West London. And in my wider work, I recorded people who had migrated recently and also second and third generation to see over time what's happening in the community. But everyone I'll quote now is a Londoner from birth. So first, a middle-aged man, Anwar, these are pseudonyms, who's a linguistic chameleon, a very lively extrovert who's fluent in many styles of speaking. He says, when I went to meet cousins up north, you can tell there and then, yeah, this guy is from Southall. But he goes on, but it's horses for courses. When I speak to an Englishman, then I would speak to him in a manner that I'm speaking to you. But then when I'm speaking to a person that hasn't got the right accent, you know, visibly English is not his first language, then you tend to, I mean, my daughter says, you spoke to that person like bud. That's their family word for Indian accent. You know, but I say that's because that's the response I was getting. He says, I've mastered this in regional languages in Pakistan as well. When a customer comes from the northwest frontier, we have to speak to him like this. If you're speaking to somebody who's a typical Punjabi, talk like that. His brother Naseem has had a very similar life to his. They both went into their father's business. Their wives came from Pakistan. His brother is slightly older and was old enough to experience a controversial school busing policy in West London, designed to limit the numbers of non-white children in schools in the 70s. His brother was younger and didn't experience it. And even though they had almost identical lives, Naseem's overall accent is different. It's a safer traditional Cockney English that matches his white English peers, white British peers. He says, quote, we used to be bused from Southall to George Hormington School. That was quite difficult when you're about 12, 13. It's quite frightening traveling. Racism, you know, all the time. You'd be scared to get picked on. When my friends and I would go to the park, we had to be very, very careful, because always there'd be somebody, they'd come up and they'd attack us. And about language, he says, when I used to speak Punjabi and Urdu before, they used to take the proverbial mickey, so then I just stopped speaking it. A younger man, Anand, in his 20s, the younger generation, when I did this research, had very, very different language experiences and very different lived experience. So he says, I speak Punjabi at home all the time. I speak English outside. They sometimes crisscross a bit. With my mom, it's mainly Punjabi. Every now and then we chuck in an English word. But every English word I say is not in the sense that a zebra is jibra, because there's no z in Punjabi, right? My mom said the word jacuzzi the other day. She called it scoozy. No, wait, even I said it wrong. She said jacuzzi. So he had to correct himself. He said, my grandma calls McDonald's Damkona. And then he carries on. But then when I'm with my Punjabi peers, we'll mix it up or speak mainly English. Every now and then a word or two in Punjabi will come in, but it's intentional. But there's other times when it happens unintentionally. With my English friends, I'll speak an English word, but it'll come out with an Indian accent. So you feel this tension that you're not always wanting to mix, but that's the part of who he is rather than who he's trying to be. And there's the other extreme, he says, where I'm just with purely English friends or barristers and teachers and what have you. And with them, I'm just English, very British, very straight line, kind of, oh, how are you? Nice to meet you. They'll feel comfortable with that. I feel comfortable speaking to them in that tone. You feel you belong where there's an understanding, there's that link. And finally, he says, I'm going to America next year. I intend to go out there with a very British accent because they love the British accents. So I'm going to go out there and be like tomato potatoes. A friend of his, Ravinder, is more conflicted and unsure. He says, it's embarrassing sometimes when I'm with my friends. My parents phone and I speak in an Indian accent. I can't speak in the British accent to them. In school, most of the Asians, he says about school, most of the Asians used to copy black style, mainly the youngsters. You grow out of it. Some people do, some people don't. Since 2 years ago, I used to think I'm acting too black. It's getting old now. Everyone will make fun of me. So I started acting like a bit more Asian. There's one boy, he came from Southall, tall, like a really good-looking boy. Everyone liked him. All the girls liked him. Everybody. And all the boys looked up to him. And he's really Punjabi. Speaks Punjabi all the time. And when he came in, people started thinking, oh, look, it's not really bad to be Punjabi. So he set the example. And from then, everyone in the school started speaking Punjabi as well. They got more into it. And finally, Namrita, a young woman a little older than them, she says, yeah, we mix words purely because sometimes there aren't words. Like cha. It's a kind of longing you were just talking about. She says in the Punjabi word cha. How do you express that in English? That longing. No, it's not really a longing, but it's that, excitement. It's a longing, a desire, but that's not powerful enough. Elsewhere, she says, my second brother didn't stick at Punjabi school long enough. His Punjabi was very good, but now he speaks a different kind, a really rough kind of Punjabi since hanging out with some new friends. And later she says, I think people contradict themselves. People swing both ways. They'll choose what suits them when they want. I'll be less British in a certain circumstance, or I won't be too Punjabi in a certain circumstance. I'm not being more one way or the other. I'm just being me. I'm just me. As time is limited, we can't hear other interesting outcomes of migration and contact. For example, playful or mocking or inexpert uses. We see a lot of borrowing each other's languages among young people. These social effects of playful use or borrowing depend entirely on the circumstances of use. But they also depend on the speaker. As the sociologist Pierre Bourdieu said, quote, the same linguistic productions may obtain radically different profits depending on the transmitter. But our speakers today that I've been quoting have astutely observed a lot about how language shapes the self. They've shown us that people absorb and adapt many speech codes through social interaction, not even consciously usually. People vary in how much they control each of these, but they also manipulate them to be different selves, to achieve different things interactionally. They build a repertoire of these ways of speaking from childhood to adulthood, out of a mix of necessity and desire. And I mentioned that we're looking at a lot of other communities. I wanted to mention here that in a very large project on London speech, one of the subgroups with the broadest range that we found is 30-year-old North London men of African heritage who have shown some of the most social mobility. So they've gone to schools in Tottenham. They had West African languages and West African Englishes in the home, and they're now working as lawyers, as bankers, and they have this incredible linguistic repertoire that they develop in that London life. Speakers today have shown that people are constrained by their social networks, by some of their acquisition patterns, but individual personality and even the occasional charismatic leader like the boy in school can play a big part too in outcomes of language in communities. And finally, social meaning of words, of sounds, lives at different levels. words and sounds can be of our language or our community, like cha, the Punjabi word that she said she doesn't give up because it means something more. Words can be special to our family or friends, like bud, which I think was only that family's term for a certain speech style. And even individuals like the grandma who wants to go to Damkona for a burger. When we lose linguistic diversity, we lose the raw material of social life. A person is never a single self or two selves. I'm often asked that because I work on Diaspora. Do people have two selves? We don't have two selves, we don't have one self. What we hear in speech is the push and pull of hundreds of fleeting, often contradictory affiliations, sedimentary layers of who we've wanted to be, but also simply who and where we have been all our lives. Thank you.
Good evening, Sanbonani. I greet you in my mother tongue. isiZulu from South Africa, and one of my mother tongues, perhaps. And Sanbonani, just lightly translated, would be, we see you. But if I were to try and translate it in a way where we translate the untranslatable, it tries to say, the people I walk with see the people you walk with. The histories I walk with see the histories you walk with. And I guess in this room, the languages I walk with see the languages you walk with. So, Sanbonani, we see you. Thank you so much for having me here this evening. It's a joy to go on after that, and after hearing, that oral literature and archival. It's such a beautiful thing as someone who grew up with all of these languages inhabiting one body, going from seeing my father over there and German, and then switch to my mother, it's Zulu, and suddenly the family language becomes English, and then my cousin over there is in Xhosa, and all of these languages inhabiting the same space. And particularly also the complexities, I guess, of being someone who is deeply proud of having those languages, who also knows the layered histories and weirdnesses and complexities between those cultures, but also who has gone through an education system that is predominantly English and has been told not to speak my mother tongue because I don't know the art of conversation if I do, and who has gone through academia and now knows how to express herself better in the English language than in my own mother tongues. So there are many things to be carried in these bodies, and that's why these rooms are so needed, necessary, beautiful, healing. So I appreciate being on the stage today. And part of what academia has done for me, though, is allowed me to reclaim things like storytelling and to see them as valid and beautiful and deep knowledge that deserves to be delved into. So my poetry today is very much inspired by the storytelling cultures that raised me. Predominantly in English, with a bit of English, with a bit of German and Zulu and Xhosa. Maybe I'll tell you a bit of context. In the Zulu culture, when a baby is born, you bury the umbilical cord in the ancestral land to introduce it to its people, to its land, and to claim, root it in where it is born. When you are a baby of multiple lands, where does that burial happen? And so this is me sharing with you various languages, people, and places that mine might be buried in. O Tannenbaum, wie treu sind deine Blätter. O Tannenbaum, wie treu sind deine Blätter. Die Jale na Samanzini. O Tannenbaum, die Jale, wo sind deine Wurzeln? Bayangibuza ukuthi inkaba yami yembelwephi, Aber was, wenn es nicht begraben ist? They ask me where my umbilical cord is buried. When I was told stories about how the roots met their land, I remember wanting to listen to the song of the rain. There was this familiar voice there, this familiar rhythm I could swear I once knew. Sometimes I was sure that my pulse was in time. In my mother's house, the only way to keep breathing was to sing. Qalingoma sithandwa sam, dikyale nasemanzini. In my father's house, we danced inside a glass of water, alongside bright-colored pigments and floating paintbrush hairs. Spiel doch einfach, mein Schatz. But sometimes the person you are painting for is simply too far. You can try as hard as you like, but you cannot fold yourself into a paper plane, even when somebody needs you to press in the creases, smooth the surfaces, bend your corners at exactly the right angles, but hurl yourself across the ocean and you will land in it. You will fall inside and disintegrate. All the words written across your pages, the I miss you on your arms, the hang in there on your calf, even the wait for me at the door of your ribcage and the landing in the pit of your heart, all of it slowly bleeds across and off your pages the longer it stays in the water, alongside bright-colored pigments and floating paintbrush hairs. Spiel doch einfach, mein Schatz. Qalingoma, dikyale nasemanzini. Oh Tannenbaum, wo sind deine Wurzeln? My Uroma opens the door. She gathers all the words she has found along the shore. I breathe in her scent and store it safely next to Mama's honey voice. Somewhere inside of me, I carry them. Opa pulls out a notebook and we multiply and long divide our joy into bits and pieces that I will tell Umkhulu about when he visits in my dreams. And Oma has on her lap photo albums, and we touch the faded pictures. Their stories relived on old women's tongues. Their stories relived on old women's tongues, alive. Can you taste it? When it slips off your tongue. Goko lives here too, on the tongues of my cousins, who learned to sew from her before I was even a drop of rain in the sky. Nansa, can you see it? Can you hear it? A home where we fly. Tapa, 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 tapa. Imanzi lokweyam. When water lives in the sky, alive. Can you hear it? There is Nikolaus, who fills my shoes with gifts through Papa's secret hands, and a Christmas tree with snow falling outside. O Tannenbaum, wo sind deine Wurzeln? Aber was, wenn sie nicht begraben sind? Dikyale nasemanzini. Und pflanz mich auch im Wasser. Dikyale nalapa, nalapa, nalapa. Nalapa, Nalapa und hier und auch hier und auf diese Ecke der Welt and hier sind die Wurzeln and in this corner of the world and this corner and even this here. There, when my umbilical cord landed in the ocean, lives there, alive. Can you hear it? Never letting go of either of my shores. When I was water and I knew that we are always home. Gabon. Thank you.
Eviani Nomakwesi, that was a fantastic presentation and performance which spoke to each other so clearly. Thank you for sharing those language stories. Some linguists talk of a phenomenon called translanguaging. It's a word that was first coined in Welsh, to go back to the opening pair there. And we've just seen translanguaging there, I think, in action. That idea that languages are not static. They are organic, dynamic phenomena. They're places where accents and registers intersect. Languages aren't even distinct in many contexts. They interact in ways for which we cannot legislate and that challenge traditional hierarchies. Thank you so much to both of you. I'm now going to introduce our final speaker and performer, Bensi Wall and Zoe McWhinney. We're going to move beyond national and linguistic boundaries with a final talk and performance that are going to explore the international identity and language in the deaf community. Bensi is Honorary Professor of Sign Language and Deaf Studies at University College London. She's been involved in research on sign language for nearly 40 years and is a member of the Academy. Zoe is a BSL poet and a visual vernacular performer. She was runner-up BSL Poet Laureate for 2025-26, and she was nominated for the Forward Poetry Prize in the performance category. Bensi's talk is going to explore three important key concepts that underpin our understanding of the deaf self from the 16th century to the present day, and that will be followed by Zoe's performance. If I could just give you a brief insight into Zoe's creative process. Zoe's work is created in BSL and visual vernacular. She then translates it into English for the benefit of the voiceover, and the poems we will enjoy tonight emerge in performance. Over to you. Thank you, Bensi.
I think we have some slides. I'm speaking my presentation, but of course it's being interpreted into British Sign Language. Something should turn up. No? It should be there. Oh, okay. So let me start by talking about three important things that you have to remember because they're going to play a part throughout the talk. First of all, sign languages are not related to spoken languages. There is no historical or linguistic connection between British Sign Language and English. Sign languages appear spontaneously when deaf people are in contact with each other. There are many, many different sign languages in the world. About 250 are listed in Ethnologue, which is a listing of the world's languages. They're complex languages, and although there are all these different languages, the important thing I want to talk about is that despite these many different languages, deaf people regard themselves as belonging to a single international community and have this really remarkable ability to interact across language boundaries. And so these characteristics show enormous solidarity amongst the world's deaf community and their identification with each other. So just to get some concepts, you'll see I sometimes use an uppercase D, and that's because to be deaf with a lowercase d is to have an audiological problem, not hearing. But to be deaf with a big D is to belong to a community. And deaf communities have two aspects to them. They're about, they come into existence because deaf people are excluded from society, but they also represent a desire to create another kind of community with its own social structures and its own languages. And it seems to be the case that wherever deaf people have been in contact with each other, some kind of sign language begins to develop. So here is a quote, which I won't read, but I'll tell you a little bit about it. It's written by someone who was a member of Parliament from Cornwall. He wrote this in 1602, and he's talking about a deaf servant. And I'll let you read the quote in a minute, but I think the crucial point is he has a deaf friend. So we kind of know that if deaf people have other deaf people in the family, you begin to get the basic building blocks of sign language. But here you can see how deaf people seek each other out and seem to communicate with each other, you know, in a emotionally and intellectually satisfying way. And remember that this is well before there were any schools for deaf children, so it's not, you know, some people believe sign languages were invented by hearing people at schools, but, you know, this is long before that. Okay, well, schools did start in the 18th century in Britain, and this is actually a picture from a pamphlet that was produced in the late 19th century, by which time there was a very well-established deaf community. If you look at the bottom center, you can see the ladies on the left are having a sign language conversation while the men are doing manly things like playing billiards and doing keep fit and so on. And the deaf community itself produced many of the artist who produced this was a deaf graphic artist and wallpaper designer. And you see many of these things in the 19th century. Here's another example where the caption at the bottom says, "International greeting in the signs language. Pat is glad to hear that John is well and that Sandy says he is the same." And there are some cliched English, Scottish, and Irish drawings. Again, something created by a deaf person in the 19th century. So there's some kind of notion about this cross-linguistic communication. And a really nice example, and this is, I think, the last quote I'll show you, is about a visit by a teacher of the deaf in the early 19th century who was deaf himself. He was French. His name was Laurent Clerc. And he became the first teacher of the deaf in the United States. He was taken to the United States by Mr. Gallaudet in about 1815. But the quote is about Claire being in London and somebody with a group of French people who were trying to raise money for the school in Paris. And the author of this book that the quote is from describes Claire coming into this school in London and meeting the deaf children. And it's clearly describing translanguaging, cross-linguistic communication, but also importantly, that these people, these children and this deaf man from another country feel an enormous link of identity and that they belong to the same community. And another example of that was that in the 19th century also, the French began holding international silent banquets, which basically people came to and they made toasts in some kind of cross-linguistic communication. I think women didn't feature very much in these banquets, but anyway. So when signers meet each other, they know that they can communicate with each other. It's not only possible, but it's part of the core of the deaf existence. And so deaf people communicate very readily with each other in something that's called international sign. It's not their own sign language. It seems to be created on the spot, but also over time develops into a more coded system. And at the time we're at now, in the 21st century, there's a lot of interest in and a lot of very sort of bad examples of people coming up with automated translation or trying to create sort of automated translation between sign languages and spoken languages, written languages. None of them is yet near to existence. So, that may not be the case, but we have, through technology, had an enormous increase in the opportunities for deaf people to interact with each other remotely across language boundaries. And it's truly wonderful to see an international Zoom conversation where everybody's talking at once because, of course, there's no issue about the sound and overlap. And so you can have these really nice group interactions. So really to kind of summarize, the unique features of sign languages, their nesting and existence in this very visual form of interaction, and also the fact that deaf people see themselves as members of an international community. It really helps us think how the traditional perspectives that we have that arise from only thinking about spoken languages don't capture the dynamism of deaf translanguaging or cross-linguistic interaction. And, the vitality and the future of the international deaf community is linked completely to this openness and collaboration and this notion of the international deaf community. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So tonight I'll be doing poetry, and this was inspired by Levet Beskard. He is a French man, and he has a Turkish heritage. So the poem itself, I consign this into British, international, different languages. The poem is beautiful, and it's a really rare poem that's actually written with visual drawings. And this is called La Ligne Rouge. And this inspired me to create my poem, which is called A Deaf World. The one finger tracing a square, triangle, rhombus. The shape of your face, my friend, that's ASL. We gather, mush, mash, slap a pitter in a conclave, a lively conversation with laughter and fire's warmth. Oh, the bread's ready. We keepsake a little string to bring back home, to string into a loom the marching machine. Click that clack, this in and out, slide to side to side. Sliding, slowly tracing into reality a vision. Like a 3D printer, slide by slide. It goes like a turquoise handprint and the golden rise that use between our fingers, the rich skies beyond turquoise, golden, and royal blue. Kinda like the background of so many sign language information videos, a standard set like the clockwork. Turquoise, royal, and golden. Like the musical score of the power lines and their posts. Passing a train window. The musical score of the approaching junctions, thousand steel rails, a terminus metal. And the music of impressive, static faces amidst screeching and squealing of London Underground Libum's trains. We are scattered, but never far, and cannot stay away for long. Because we, you see, have this knack of rolling to our own centers of gravity, plopping here and there and rolling hither, to witness the sudden migration filtering through their own nods. If they suddenly feel, they feel like they're on a weird acid dream of loud, expressive silence. That's the feeling. Towards awesome, spectacular of concentration, where everyone signs. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening to my poetry. So I now have an additional poet. It's full of VV, so there will be no voicing over for this performance. And the poem is called My Heart is Beating. And it's in reference to animals and the planet and bleeding red. So that's the meaning of the poem. I hope you will understand the poem. Let's see. you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Bensi. Thank you, Zoe, for that wonderful complementary pair of reflection and performance. I think what we've seen tonight is a really exciting model of ideas and practice in dialogue. You've really there completed a remarkable panorama that we've shared together over the past hour or so, starting with the indigenous languages of the UK with Rob and Mared, then thinking about home heritage community languages with Devyani and Nomakwezi, and then finishing up with that exploration of sign with Bensi and Zoe. And we're reminded, I think, that all of those languages, despite their very real differences, are part of the multilingual texture of the UK, and they inevitably connect us up with the wider world. So I'd like to conclude by thanking all three of our speakers, all three of our performers, by thanking our interpreters, and also, of course, thanking the events team here at the British Academy who've allowed us to gather and to think together this evening. What I think we've seen is the way in which multilingualism is very much providing a set of resources and opportunities. It's not a problem or an impediment, as sometimes it seems, particularly in policy and politics. Languages are key to identity, they're key to heritage, they're key to our multiple cultural affiliations. At the British Academy, we're increasingly reflecting on the close relationship between the lived multilingualism of the United Kingdom, and we've seen magnificent, very moving examples of that tonight. But the relationship between that lived multilingualism and language learning, whether it's formal or informal. At the same time, and that's why I think those pairings have been so powerful, we've seen the way in which multilingualism can be this great source of innovation and creativity. Many of you will be familiar with the work of the Kenyan novelist and thinker Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who died last summer. In his penultimate book about translation, called The Language of Languages, there's a very striking phrase, and I think it's been illustrated tonight. Ngugi writes, "Monolingualism is the carbon monoxide of cultures. Multilingualism is its oxygen." And I think we've had a really striking illustration of that. Thanks again to our three speakers and our three performers. The final event in this series, The Age of Self, will take place on the 26th of May. That event will explore the theme of identity in the age of social media. And those of you who are interested in attending and haven't yet signed up, there are still some tickets available to join the live stream. If you'd like to stay in the loop about the fantastic upcoming programme of events at the Academy, please scan that QR code on the screen and you can sign up for our newsletter. As we said at the beginning, there'll be no Q&A, but the bar will remain open until 8:45. So please, if you've got time, stick around to chat to our speakers and performers, who I thank once more before we end.